3 sinister camping horrors revealed. Terrifying true encounters with the haunted and unexplained. The woods loomed ahead, gnarled trees clawing the sky like menacing fingers. A place where shadows danced. Where whispers stirred the night. Black Creek National Park held secrets that would chill your bones. Sarah Johnson clenched the steering wheel, her heart racing. The stories she'd heard echoed in her mind, each more horrifying than the last. But she needed this trip. She wanted to reignite the spark with her husband Mike, and for their kids, Emily and Jake, a connection with nature that was so desperately needed. As they pulled into the park, the fragrant pines mingled with an unsettling undercurrent. It was serene, yes, but a palpable tension filled the air. Campers exchanged hushed warnings about the disappearances that shadowed the park's history. Hikers who vanished without a trace. Shadows whispered of in campfire tales. Sarah shook off the chill creeping down her spine, attributing it to the weakest stress. Just stories, she reassured herself. They can't be true. Mike chuckled, his stoic demeanor barely wavering. What's next, the big bad wolf? He laughed, his attempt at humor forced, and their children giggled nervously, not convinced. Night fell like a shroud. In the darkness, strange rustling sounded just beyond the flickering campfire. Just the wind, Mike assured, but the laughter of the children faded, replaced by a nervous stillness. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if something was watching. A park ranger, their too friendly demeanor made Sarah uneasy, lingered too long at their campsite. Enjoy your stay, he insisted, his eyes glinting strangely in the firelight. That unsettling smile did little to ease her growing anxiety. Then came the storm. Rain pelted down like stones, wind howled, and lightning split the sky. Their beloved camping trip twisted into panic. Seeking refuge, they fled through the woods, drenched and disoriented. When they stumbled upon an old cabin, decrepit, antique, and somehow sinister. Inside, shadows played tricks on their eyes, and the air felt damp with secrets. Emily's curiosity drew her closer to the walls, where faded photographs hung like phantoms. She gasped, pointing at scenes that were all wrong. Families gathered around their own fire, but something in their eyes spoke of dread and despair. Rituals? Sacrifices? The revelation struck like a bolt of lightning. This isn't just camping, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jake, oblivious and entranced, picked up mud and began to mold strange figures that echoed the images hung around them. Mom, look! Stop it, Jake! Sarah snapped, panic creeping into her voice. The atmosphere crackled with tension, and just as they thought they might regain control, soft giggles fluttered outside the cabin. The forest felt alive, breathing, watching. Lightning illuminated the ranger's face, twisted in a grin that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. You shouldn't be here, he crooned, his voice sweet yet sinister. The walls of the cabin felt like they were closing in. Her heart raced as they faced the darkness together, their bonds fraying under the weight of fear. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the storm roared outside, Sarah's thoughts spiraled. Each moment passed like an eternity. The ranger stepped closer, encroaching on their fragile family unit. What echoed in the cabin wasn't merely the storm, but the collective breaths of those who come before them, perhaps those who never left. Would they add to the grim history of the woods? Jake's giggles turned to terrified cries, shadows and whispers closing in, leaving Sarah cornered between confronting haunting secrets or slipping into the velvet darkness of the forest, forever lost. The wind screamed outside, tossing branches against the cabin like skeletal fingers trying to claw their way in. Sarah's heart thudded in her chest as the ranger's eyes glinted with a hunger that made her skin crawl. Mike stepped forward, trying to shield his family. We need to get out of here, he said, his voice low and steady, but it quaked like the very earth beneath them. Emily tugged at Sarah's sleeve, her wide eyes searching for reassurance. "What's wrong with him, Mom?" she whimpered. That question hung in the air, heavy as the storm clouds above. Sarah couldn't find the words. They morphed into a nightmare that twisted in her mind. Every legend she dismissed now clawing for attention. Let us just go," Sarah stammered, wresting Jake's muddy figures from his hands. He looked up, confusion masking his fear. The storm echoed through the trees, drowning her voice as she glanced back at Mike, silently pleading for a plan. The ranger chuckled softly, a sound that curled around the edges of her sanity. "Oh, you can't leave yet. Not until you know." He leaned closer, eyes sparkling with eerie delight. "Not until you learn what others have." "Learn what?" Mike shouted, fists clenched. The sound of their hearts thumped like war drums in the heated silence. Shadows writhed behind the ranger, almost alive, eager to partake in the unfolding dread. With every passing second, the air seemed thicker, as though the darkness itself was a living, breathing thing. Fastening his grip around Sarah's arm, Mike whispered, "We need to find a way to escape, now." But before they could move, a loud crash resounded outside, a monstrous thud that stole their breath. Sarah strained to listen over the roaring storm, the sound of footsteps heavy and deliberate sinking into the mud. Nature seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, another terrified yelp shattered the stillness. It was Jake, pointing out the filthy window. "Look, Mom! Who's that?" But when Sarah turned, dread curdled in her stomach. Just beyond the rain-soaked trees, figures stirred. Tall, thin shapes with faces shadowed and unrecognizable danced among the raindrops. They appeared and vanished, only to re-emerge in an unsteady shuffle, drawn towards the cabin like moths to a flame. "Stay close," Mike instructed urgently, yanking Emily tighter against him. The ranger's laughter erupted, echoing in manic waves, blending with the howling wind. "You can't fight what comes for you. They're hungry," he taunted, eyes ablaze with a sinister thrill. "Who?" Sarah snapped, her voice cracking under pressure. But he only continued to laugh, stepping back as if revealing a grotesque finale. Shadows crawled up the walls, congealing like dark liquid, pooling around the cabin's feet. Unthinkable faces appeared in the murk, staring with hollow eyes, mouths twisted in silent screams. The storm's fury intensified, splattering rain against the tattered roof. Their breaths quickened. "We can't stay here," Sarah screamed, panic clouding her vision. The ranger's grin never wavered. "You're already a part of it." Another crash sounded outside. The door rattled violently, splintering against the weight of unseen forces. The children burst into tears, the fear palpable and raw. "Now," Mike growled, taking charge, his voice more forceful. We pushed through the door, but the shadows grew claws, reaching as they thundered against the wood. In the flashes of lightning, those desperate faces twisted and shifted, crying for freedom, forgotten souls trapped in a sick game. As the door flew open, the tempest yawned wide, inviting them into the black abyss outside. Would they leap into the storm and face the lingering whispers of the woods, or embrace the horror that waited within? "Run!" Mike shouted, as the cabin groaned under pressure from the storm and the past. The family bolted out into the night. But there was no safety in the dark. Only lingering shadows reached to embrace them, what waited beyond the trees. The forest rippled with anticipation, revealing its dark heart and evil that craved more than just fear. Would their frantic escape lead to salvation, or would they simply become the next whispers in the wind, forever trapped in the haunted woods? They plunged into the storm, the rain soaking them instantly, cold fingers of dread clawing at their spine. Mike pushed forward, shoving through the branches that seemed to grab at his clothes, desperate to keep the children close. Another crash echoed from the cabin behind, a final scream of wood splintering under the weight of something unnatural. "Keep moving! Don't look back!" he shouted, his voice almost lost in the roar of the wind. The trees loomed like monstrous sentinels, twisted and crooked, obstructing their path. Sarah glanced at Emily, whose terrified face was lit up with flashes of lightning. "What is happening, Mom?" Emily's voice wavered, tears blending with the rain on her cheeks. I don't know," Sarah gasped, her heart racing as she pulled Jake along. The boy wailed, half-drugged as fear consumed him. They had barely reached the first line of trees when they heard the rustling behind them, branches snapping, footsteps like thunder. The shadows moved, flowing between the trees as if they were alive. Sarah wanted to scream, to let it all out, but she stifled it deep within. She focused on Mike, whose face was determined, yet fear flickered behind his steely eyes. "Stay with me," he barked. They ran deeper into the forest, the underbrush tearing at their skin, the wind howling with a malicious glee that echoed their growing terror. Each crash behind felt like the breath of a beast hunting them. Then they stumbled into a clearing, a momentary pause where they caught their breath. Panting, drenched, they huddled close. But just as relief dared to seep in, Sarah's instincts screamed that it was a trap. The shadows thickened, drawing in, hungry for their fear. The ranger's words echoed in Sarah's mind. They were already a part of it. "Look," Jake shouted, pointing with shaky fingers. In the center of the clearing, an ancient stone altar rose from the earth, weathered and covered in dark moss, like a forgotten monument. The air grew dense around it, suffocating and heavy. On top of the altar, lined with twisted roots, lay offerings, muddy trinkets, old bones, and discarded clothing, remnants of lost souls. "Oh God," Sarah whispered, instinctively reaching for her children as cold dread knotted in her stomach. This was no ordinary place. It pulsed with a sinister energy. The shadows ducked and weaved around the altar, shadows morphing into familiar shapes, faces twisted in agony, reaching for her. Their mouths moved, forming silent screams that clawed at her very soul. "Mom!" Emily cried, pulling on Sarah's arm. "They're trying to talk to us." "No, we need to go," Mike urged, but the shadows thickened, obstructing their way. The wind howled again, throwing back leaves like a torrent. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, thin, the ranger. His grin spread wider, too wide to be human. "You found it," he said, voice chillingly calm, a stark contrast to the chaos. "This is where they gather. They've been waiting for another soul." Panic ignited within Mike's chest as he stepped in front of Sarah and the kids. "Not my family," he screamed, launching himself at the ranger. But the shadows surged, wrapping around Mike, pulling him back like a flood. "Dad!" Jake shouted, reaching out. Sarah felt her heart shatter as she watched Mike struggle against the encroaching darkness. "Run!" He managed through gritted teeth, terror reflecting in his eyes as he was dragged away. "No!" Sarah screamed, her voice ripping through the night. "You can't escape!" The ranger's voice boomed, laughter mingling with the wind, chilling Sarah to her core. With her heart racing, Sarah grabbed both children and plunged deeper into the forest, tears streaming down her face as the shadows swirled around her like a storm of despair. She had to get them away from this place. But where could she go? Suddenly, a low growl rose from the depths of the woods, like a beast revealing itself in the shadows. The ground trembled beneath them, echoing their frantic steps. What fresh horror lay ahead? And would they even survive long enough to uncover the truth behind the haunting? Whispers that echoed through the trees. Branches clawed at Sarah's face as she ran, her heart a war drum in her chest. The growl grew louder, rumbling like thunder, shaking leaves from the trees and rattling her very bones. She glanced back, breath hitching in her throat. The altar flickered in and out of view, a dark beacon of dread. Mike, had he made it out? She couldn't let the children see her fear. "Keep moving," Sarah urged, her voice cracking under the pressure. Emily and Jake, wide-eyed and drenched, followed her as she pushed through the brambles, the underbrush a suffocating barrier. But ahead, shadows coiled and twisted like living smoke, swirling and thickening in their path, filling the space with a palpable malice. Each step became heavier, as if the ground conspired against them, dragging them back toward the altar. "Mom, I can't," Jake gasped, stumbling over roots. His little legs could barely keep up now, shaking with terror. Just a little further. She insisted, her desperation surging. They had to get out. They had to suddenly. A shriek sliced the air, high-pitched and haunting. Emily clutched her sister's arm, eyes wide with fright. What was that? Just keep going. Sarah shouted, but the shadows reflected in her children's eyes. They were losing faith. Ahead, the darkness erupted. A gnarled figure emerged. From the nothingness, limbs twisted at unnatural angles. It grinned, showing impossibly sharp teeth, its eyes glowing with a sickly light. This thing was more than a shadow, it was a nightmare made flesh. "Mom!" Jake cried, voice trembling. "Run!" she screamed, pushing them forward, but the outlet was closing in on all sides. The darkness had teeth, eager to snap at their heels. They sprinted, Sarah tugging them along with every ounce of strength she had left. The growls harmonized with the laughter of the ranger. "They're so fragile," he taunted, voice echoing through the trees. "Just souls waiting for the dark." A sudden flash of lightning illuminated a narrow path through the thicket. "This way," Sarah directed, veering off. The shadows hissed, a choir of fading whispers that clawed at her resolve. She led them further into the woods, the air thick with rain and terror. But something was wrong. Where was the wind? It had stilled, leaving an unsettling silence that draped over them like a shroud. "Mom, I can't breathe," Jake murmured behind her. Sarah glanced back. Emily looked pale, fear etched on her features. "We're not gonna make it, are we?" she asked, her voice tiny and lost. "No, don't," Sarah started. But an enveloping darkness rushed in, swallowing light and hope. Out of nowhere, a snapping twig echoed through the silence. A warning. Sarah's breath caught. How could they be so close to hell and yet feel so empty? Then she saw it, a reflection of hope. A faint glow flickered through the trees, beckoning them. "Over there." She pointed, heart racing faster than her feet. But before they could move toward it, the growling returned, closer, more insistent. With the altar still behind them, they pushed forward into the grip of the unknown. The glow, though weak, seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, urging them closer. But would it lead them to safety or to an even darker fate? A loud crash sounded from the direction they had been running from. The altar was alive, angry, and it lashed out in vengeance. "Go!" she yelled, sensations knotting her stomach as they sprinted toward the flickering light, unsure if it held salvation or yet another snare. The forest closed in, shadows tugging at their clothes, hungry for what little courage they had left. And just as they burst through the last of the underbrush, everything fell silent again. Sarah stopped cold, eyes darting. "Look," Emily said, pointing at the edge of the clearing ahead. Before them stood a weathered sign, words barely legible through the layers of grime. "Beware. No one returns from here." The panic surged again, roaring in her ears as her heartbeat clashed against the veil of shadow creeping closer. What waited in that gloom? Was it merely an ancient warning, or did it hold an unbearable truth? "What do we do now?" Jake asked, eyes filled with fear. But their options were shrinking. Would they confront the darkness ahead or succumb to the shadows that hunted them? The whispers in the trees grew louder, pleading, anticipating. As darkness encircled them, one question hung heavy in the air, icy and tense. Would they become the next offerings or find a way out of this nightmare? The sound of the forest enveloped them, a thick blanket of silence mixed with the soft, ominous rustling of branches. Shadows crept closer, stretching like fingers hungry to ensnare them. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to move, but the weathered sign etched haunting dread into her mind. "No one returns from here." "Mom, I'm scared," Jake whimpered, looking up at her, his little face pale. The weight of that statement struck harder than any thundering growl. "Just a moment," she whispered, trying to steady her breath. Her heart raced, thudding against her ribs as she scanned their surroundings. Behind them, the growling deepened, an echo of monstrous rage that reverberated through her bones. It was a reminder of the nightmare they fled, and the paralysis set in. She had to keep Jake and Emily safe no matter what. Let us get to that light," she stammered, voice barely above a whisper. But just as they turned to move, the sickly glowing pulse ahead dimmed, faltering like a dying flicker of hope. A feeling of wrongness washed over her. The light that had beckoned wasn't a guide anymore but a lure into darkness. "Do you hear that?" Emily's voice broke through the oppressive quiet. The slightest echo of whispers flitted through the trees. They sounded almost familiar, like echoing cries of lost souls. Panic smoldered in Sarah's chest as she attempted to suppress the rising tide of fear. "Please, stay close," she urged, gripping her children's hands tightly. The dim light was now a ghostly glimmer just ahead, but it pulsed erratically. Each beat made the shadows ripple and twist, growing ever more restless. The growling shifted, blending with directions from the chorus of whispers. It sounded as if they were urging them, come closer, we can't." Sarah hissed, gritting her teeth, but her feet were moving despite her better judgment, the glow holding a spell over her senses. With every tentative step, the ground felt more unstable, as if it shared their dread. Each rustle of leaves and snap of twig was amplified in the charged silence. She could sense the shadows swirling, arrows of malice narrowing in on their position. "Mom!" Jake's tiny voice trembled, dragging her back as fear clawed at her resolve. She turned her eyes to her children. They needed reassurance, yet the darkness was blinding her to the truth. "We have to keep moving," she insisted, this time with more conviction, as the whispers grew louder around them. As they inched toward the fading glow, a shadow flicked across Sarah. Hot breath suddenly washed over her neck, drawing her focus back. The gnarled figure she had glimpsed earlier was now looming just at the edge of the trees, limbs twisting and contorting. It grinned at them, its eyes burning with fervent hunger. "Run!" In that instant, survival instinct burst forth, and they bolted towards the flickering ghost of light ahead. But they weren't alone anymore. From the depths of the shadows, figures began to emerge, shifting and morphing, their forms barely human against the darkness surrounding them. "Join us," they hissed, voices entwined with the rustling of leaves. The glow surged back to life, illuminating faces twisted in torment. Souls trapped in the purgatory of the forest, their hands outstretched, beckoning. Fear overwhelmed Sarah like a roaring tide. The horrible realization gripped her. They were not just escaping the gnarled beast. They were upon a whole army of the lost that sealed the fate of anyone who entered. "Keep running," she shouted, adrenaline surging as she tightened her grasp on Jake and Emily. But their legs felt heavier. Each stride grew more labored, as whispers wrapped around them, dragging them into the dark like a net. Then, a girl stood among the shadows, staring directly at Emily with hollow eyes. "Mom, she is so sad," Emily gasped, stopping mid-run. Sarah's heart raced. "No, don't look at her. She is not real." But the girl stepped closer, voice sweet and melodic. "Help us," she coaxed. Suddenly, a deafening roar shattered the night, the darkness recoiling as though in pain. The growl that reverberated through the air was unlike anything they had heard before. Something primal unleashed. It could either be their salvation or the beginning of the end. "Run!" Sarah screamed again, and they surged forward. Behind them, the shadows shifted uneasily, a warning, but as they reached the light, Sarah braced herself for what lay beyond. What fate awaited them in the glow? Would it be more than just another shadow waiting to claim their souls? The bright light surged, illuminating a path that seemed both inviting and treacherous. They had to find out. Time was running out. Would they embrace the unknown, or were they finally trapped in this nightmare? The pulsing light enveloped them like a cocoon, warm yet unsettling. It illuminated the path before them, twisting and blurring at the edges, as if it were a weak promise of safety in a world drowning in chaos. But Sarah's heart raced like a wild animal in her chest, fighting against the deceptive allure of the glow. "Mom!" Jake cried, his grip tightening even more. "What's happening? Just hold on," Sarah urged, her voice breaking as adrenaline coursed through her veins. They stumbled forward, the silhouettes of the lost gnawing at the corners of her vision. She could still hear their wails, a chorus of despair pulling at her, clawing at her sanity. With each heavy step, the ground beneath felt less like soil and more like flesh, warm and breathing, pulsing in sync with the shadows. She could feel their eyes on her, judging, hungering, waiting. Suddenly, the light flickered again, casting long, jagged shadows across the path. A snarl erupted from the darkness, reverberating like an earthquake. It was loud and feral, an animalistic sound that stemmed deep within the forest's gut. Sarah resisted the urge to look back. She knew too well that curiosity could prove lethal. "Faster!" she screamed. But as they moved, the ghostly figures from behind began to merge into the light ahead. Their twisted faces glared back at her, mouths agape, the howling winds carrying their cries. "Leave us here," they hissed, their limbs outstretched in a grotesque show of desperation. "What do they want, Mom?" Emily whimpered, frozen in place, eyes wide. "Don't listen. Keep going." Sarah pulled her daughter, thrusting her forward. Each movement began to feel heavier, suffocating her resolve. The whispers now seemed to surge, rising above the growls, a cacophony of voices. "Join us. Join us." A flash of white darted past them, and a chilling chill crept up their spines. It was the girl again, her face a haunting mask of sorrow and longing. "Help us, you can't leave. We need you, get away from her," Sarah shouted, holding Jake even tighter. They choked on fear, trying to push through the grip of despair. But the figure moved closer, and with it came a wave of emotion that crashed over Sarah, nearly knocking her off her feet. It felt like every lost hope, every sorrowful moment echoed in one painful breath. Then the shadows took a sharper, more tangible shape. Dark, sinewy forms surged toward them, as if the forest itself had cracked open to swallow them whole. Predatory eyes with an insatiable hunger bore into hers, and she felt panic claw at her throat. "Run!" The word echoed in desperation as they darted through the glimmering light, dodging reaching hands and cries that cut like glass. But with every frantic step, the flickering glow began to dim, suffocating the path ahead until it felt like they were running toward the very source of their nightmares. Just then, silence fell. A heavy, suffocating silence. The growls receded, and the cacophony hushed, leaving only the beating of their hearts in the oppressive void. "Where did?" Jake's voice trembled as the light disappeared completely. It was gone. The forest, once alive with growling and whispers, stood eerily quiet. Suddenly, a strange mist enveloped them, thick and damp, swirling like a living entity. Sarah's heart skipped as she strained her eyes, searching but seeing nothing. Then, in the void, a chilling realization hit her. The light might have been an illusion, a trick to lure them in. "And now, Mom, I can't see," Emily cried out, the panic rising in her voice. "I know. Just stay by me," Sarah said, and her own voice trembled in the stillness. It felt like they were adrift in a sea of darkness, spinning further from sanity. Then, in the mist, something stirred. A low, raspy laugh echoed, rising like smoke. It sent shards of ice racing along her spine. And then her worst fear was confirmed. "You thought you could escape," the voice crooned, sinister and familiar. "It wasn't over. Their nightmare was just beginning." "Mom!" Jake shrieked, but the laughter grew louder. Shadows pooled around them, and as Sarah's grip loosened, she heard the whispers again, curling through the air with malice. Join us, join us." What would they sacrifice to survive this night? Or were they already too far gone? As the shadows closed in, she braced herself for the horror that awaited them next. The mist thickened, a choking shroud that crept along their skin. It snaked around their ankles, pulling at them like desperate hands clawing to keep them tethered to a nightmare. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest, each pulse echoing the fear that inundated her thoughts. "Mom!" Jake's voice pierced through the fog, and Sarah turned, barely catching the outline of his trembling figure. "I'm right here." She reached out, grasping for him. Hands collided, and she held on tight, feeling the warmth of his skin, a fragile lifeline in the encroaching dread. "Something here," Jake whispered, voice barely above a hiss. The laughter slithered through the mist again, wrapping around them like ivy, choking and suffocating with malicious glee. Shadows darted within the fog, twisting into grotesque forms that lunged and recoiled, taunting them. Sarah felt it, a shadow grazing her arm, ice cold, leaving a trail of terror boiling beneath her skin. "Look," Emily cried, pointing weakly into the swirling void. "There's someone there." Don't look," Sarah shouted, but it was too late. Her eyes followed Emily's trembling finger, her heart slamming against her ribs. A figure was indeed there, cloaked in midnight shadow, with a face obscured but eyes gleaming a predatory blue, cold and empty like the depths of a grave. "Help us," the voice whispered, echoing around them. "Stay, join us." "No." Sarah pulled her children closer, the words screeching through her mind like glass. "Keep moving." But the bog of mist twisted beneath her feet, the ground giving way as if it were refusing her passage. For every step forward, a dozen hands seemed to claw back, dragging at her heels, threatening to pull her into the black abyss. A howling wind sliced through the mist, pulling apart the fog momentarily to reveal a glimpse of the forest. It was not the forest they entered. This was a realm of shadows. Twisted trees twisted into agonizing shapes, contorted as if they held the memories of their victims. Each bark seemed to whisper secrets, and the air reeked of decay. "Mom, what do we do?" Emily's question sent a tremor of fear rippling through Sarah's gut. "Just stay close," Sarah managed, desperation spiking through her. "Follow my voice." They began to move again, hearts racing, forcing their legs to obey. But just as Sarah felt a flicker of hope, the shadows writhed and a guttural, ravenous growl boomed from behind. It echoed off the trunk of the sinister trees that loomed around them, drawing closer with every thudding heartbeat. Faster! God, they had to move faster. The thick mist parted again like a curtain, revealing a clearing. But what loomed before them was worse than the darkness behind. A massive stone altar, slick and shimmering with a wet sheen that reflected the pale light seeping in from nowhere. Surrounding it were the figures, the lost souls, writhing and moaning, their faces twisted in eternal despair, stretching toward the altar as if it was some god of suffering they still worshipped. "Join us," they groaned, a chilling chorus, as though the earth itself echoed their plea. "Run," Sarah screamed, pulling her children away, but the whispers shattered her resolve. "Please join us," they wailed, as if every word was laced with heartbreak and fury. And she turned to escape, her breath quickening, racing back into the fog. But as they fled, the shadows surged forward, faster than the blink of an eye, obscuring their escape. Suddenly, something gripped Sarah's ankle, cold and unyielding. She fell, dragging Emily with her, and both tumbled to the ground. "Let us go," Jake screamed, horrified, as arms reached out from the depths of the dark, snatching at the air, wild and frantic. Terror gripped them, and in that moment, Sarah felt them. The hands of the lost. They clawed at her, pulling her into the depths of despair, whispers slithering into her ears. "Mom!" Jake's voice screamed, echoing in panic, breaking through the haze. And just like that, a flash of clarity surged through her. "We're not going down like this." With every ounce of strength, she yanked Emily up and tugged Jake close. "Follow me." They hurtled forward, fighting against the dark, racing towards an opening in the mist. But what lay beyond was just as terrifying. Another laugh pierced through, darker and more sinister. "You think you can escape? You belong to us now." In their frantic run, the fog twisted and began to solidify around them, suffocating their cries. Just as it seemed to pull them into its depths, they glimpsed a flicker of light ahead, pulsing gently, shimmering through the haze. But as they drew closer, they realized it wasn't just any light. It was a beacon of hope entwined with shadow, a path out or another trap set in a web of despair. Sarah stumbled forward, terror gripping her heart. What now? The darkness behind them crept closer, whispering their names, pulling at their minds. What were they willing to sacrifice for one more chance to escape the depths of this nightmare? As they reached the threshold of light, A bone-chilling laugh echoed this time not from the shadows but from something much closer, something familiar. A voice they had known all along whispered, "You can't run from who you are." Was it too late? Were they now part of the darkness? Or could they escape? The pulsating glow ahead flickered uncertainly, casting brief hopes and lingering shadows, pulling them toward an unknown fate. What awaited them on the other side? The light pulsed, growing stronger just as the darkness shifted behind them. With every heartbeat, the sinister laughter grew closer, as if it swelled from the very ground beneath them. Sarah felt a freezing dread clench around her heart. "We must go now." She gripped Jake's hand tighter, pulling Emily along like a lifeline through the unpredictable chaos. They sprinted toward the glow, unsure of what would greet them on the other side. The shadows lunged, trying to ensnare them, shadows of the souls they'd seen. Sarah could almost hear their cries mingling with the laughter. They wanted her. They wanted her family. Thoughts of escape began to slip away like sand. As they closed in on the light, Sarah hesitated, struck by the warmth radiating from it, a stark contrast to the encroaching cold that surrounded them. What if it's a trap? Emily's voice trembled, her small frame quaking with fear. "We can't stop. We have to trust something," Sarah urged, willing herself to believe in a miracle. She pushed forward, her leg muscles burning and lungs gasping for air, dragging her children behind her. The moment they crossed into that light, a thick wall of warmth embraced them, engulfing their bodies, soothing the fear that just moments ago had threatened to consume them. They stumbled into an otherworldly expanse, where the ghostly mist receded into the distance. But just as they caught their breath, reality shifted again. Gone were the dark woods twisting in anguish. They stood in a sunlit glade, surrounded by towering trees that looked impossibly majestic, with birds singing in perfect harmony. "Is this real?" Jake gasped, glancing around as if afraid to touch the ground beneath him. "Stay close," Sarah warned. Even the joyous colors could not drown out the sense of unease. A chilling breeze swept through, stark against the warmth, whispering warnings amidst the beauty. "They are still coming," Emily murmured, looking wide-eyed at the horizon, where the darkness lingered. What do we do?" Jake's voice trembled. "Remember the altar," Sarah urged. That voice, it sounded familiar. Her pulse quickened as the landscape shifted again, uncertainty filling her vision. Thoughts of the laughter intertwined with her memories like a vine growing around her psyche. "Join us," came that voice again. Yet this time it echoed in a soothing manner, an alluring siren call that snaked into her thoughts, promising safety. "You must become one with us." "No," she shouted, squeezing her eyes shut. How could anything want them? Panic pulsed in her chest. This warmth felt like a drug, filling her veins, urging her to step forward. And yet, the darkness was creeping in again. The ground beneath them quaked, and the gentle glimmer of sunlight flickered, warping and bending. "We have to leave this place," Sarah insisted. The glow that had filled her with a sense of security was now tinged with doubt. Was their escape merely a stratagem to bring them closer to the waiting darkness? "Where can we go?" Emily asked. "Follow the path. Just move," Sarah urged, her voice trembling yet filled with resolve. She broke into a sprint, pulling her children behind her, weaving through ferns and wild flowers that seemed to beckon with every step. But every path twisted and folded upon itself, each turn leading back to the glade, entrancing and disorienting. Shadows flickered in the corners of her vision, and every gleamed reflection felt like a hand reaching from the darkness. The laughter returned, rising like a storm, echoing against the trees around them. "You will never escape," it taunted, mingled with whispers of despair and longing. Sarah felt it creeping back into her thoughts, testing her will. The allure was crushing. She squeezed her eyes shut again, but this time it felt futile. "Mom, please," Jake choked out as they stumbled through the thicket. The glade pulsed ominously, and her fears twisted into chilling clarity. "We're not just escaping the darkness. We're running into something worse," she realized, panic spilling over her composure. Just then, a deafening roar erupted from behind, shaking the very core of the forest. The shadows poured from the treetops, devouring the light. You cannot fight what is within. Frozen with dread, Sarah was met with piercing azure eyes, the same eyes that had haunted them in the fog, gleaming, demanding. The mist began to roll back toward them, and shadows emerged, no longer confined to the trees. "Mom, what is happening?" Emily stuttered. Sarah had no answer. The ground trembled beneath their feet, darkness beckoning them closer. If this was a choice between fear and the unknown, how could they withstand the weight of it? Together, she breathed, determination flooding her heart once more. But as the shadows reached out, they began to entrap the edges of her mind while the beasts thrummed in harmony around them. She had to break it, had to fight. And then she saw it, a flicker of uncertainty in the shadow's haunt. A key deep in the gloom, a chance to push back against the tide. "Hold my hand," she yelled with unapologetic fervor. What magic might they conjure from unity? Or was it merely another ploy? In the instant before the shadows swallowed them whole, she knew one thing. They would not surrender without a scream of defiance. What lay ahead in the unfolding darkness? The whispers lured them in deeper. Would they emerge stronger, or would the shadows consume them forever? The darkness rolled in, pulsating and thickening like a living thing. Sarah felt her grip slip for a moment before her fingers curled tighter around Emily's small, trembling hand. The roar that had ripped through the air trembled now, growing softer, yet echoed in the recesses of her mind, a deafening reminder of what lurked right behind them. "Mom, I can't," Jake gasped, struggling to keep pace as the shadows lunged forward with an insatiable hunger. The light that had felt so warm just moments ago dwindled, flickering like a dying ember battling the night. "This way," Sarah yelled, dragging them down a narrow path that sliced through the dense underbrush. Twisting fingers of mist reached out, wrapping them in dread as they pressed onward. She could sense the darkness coiling behind them, shifting like a predator sizing up its prey. "Where are we going?" Emily whimpered, fear spiraling in her voice. The glade they had just fled was gone, and now it felt as if they were lost in an unfathomable void. "I don't know," Sarah shouted, her heart racing. She could hear the laughter in the distance, a twisted melody that tugged at her resolve. "We just have to keep moving." But the ground beneath them heaved and bucked, almost alive with malevolent intent. With each step, it felt as though they dissolved into the sinister atmosphere, warmth overtaken by a frigid grip of despair. The trees around them leaned in, branches reaching, gnarled fingers grabbing at their clothes, almost as if the forest itself wanted them back. "Mom, look out," Jake cried, and in that moment, a shadow detached itself from the darkness, lunging toward them. It was nothing but a swirling mass of void, devoid of form, yet somehow pulsating with a heartbeat that matched Sarah's own. In a move driven by instinct, she yanked her children close and darted around the creature, the air thickening around them. A fierce wind howled, pushing them forward as if urging escape. Suddenly, a blinding light burst through the leaves, causing the shadows to flinch. Felt like a beacon, fierce and inviting. Without thinking, she raced toward it, a desperate hope flaring anew. "Keep running," she urged, ignoring the sharp edges of brambles cutting into her skin and sending pain lancing through her body. They collided with a wall of light that spread across an open clearing. She shielded her eyes, heart pounding against her ribs. The brightness engulfed them, aching and beautiful, and for a fleeting moment, they stood at the edge of salvation. But as they blinked away the light, their surroundings morphed again. They found themselves in what appeared to be a decaying cabin, windows dark and shattered, walls rotting with age. A stale, almost sweet smell filled the air, mingling with something foul, something wrong. It descended on them like an iron shroud. "Where are we?" Emily's voice shook as Sarah spun around, scanning their surroundings. The horror of the forest faded, replaced by a chilling sensation that they weren't alone. The floor creaked ominously beneath their feet, and shadows flickered along the walls, shapes darting just out of sight. "Mom, it's cold," Jake whispered, as a breath of icy air surrounded them. The warmth from the light they had so desperately sought evaporated. Then they heard it, a soft, high-pitched whispering. It slithered around them, wrapping itself around their thoughts, calling out to them in sorrowful tones. "Help us! Join us! Get back!" Sarah shouted, pulling her children close as she faced the shadows gathering in the corners. They contorted and twisted, some taking grotesque forms. Faces emerged, twisted in despair, hands reaching out as if begging. "It's a trap," she yelled, backing up toward a wall, adrenaline fueling her fight-or-flight response. The voices became louder, drowning her senses, pulling her deeper into a vortex of fear. The children clung to her, their faces pale with terror. "No, not my family," Sarah screamed, her voice cracking. She could feel the shadows cutting at her edges, threatening to engulf them whole. Her very existence felt like it was teetering on the brink of madness. "Fight it! I won't let you take my children." Suddenly, a shadow lunged at her, and as it did, a cold chill washed over her. The heat from her heart cooled, and despair wrapped itself around her like a shroud. "Mom!" Jake's helpless whisper echoed from behind, sending ice through her veins. In a moment filled with horrifying clarity, she'd finally understand what they were running from. Would they be swallowed by the darkness? A loss forever? And then it hit her. The altar. It was more than just a memory, it was a weapon. But was she strong enough to wield it? Just as she took a step forward, ready to confront the shadows, the ground trembled again beneath them. The laughter erupted into a deafening cacophony. "What if we can't escape?" Emily's plaintive question echoed in the relentless dark, a question entangled with their fate. A figure emerged from the shadows, jarring Sarah to a standstill. It was the last thing she expected to see, a memory made flesh, an impossible embodiment stepping from her nightmares. "Are you ready to join us?" It breathed, its breath a icy whisper against her skin. Sarah's heart clenched in terror, and she realized that whatever it wanted, they were closer to the edge than they ever had been. Would they confront the darkness together, or would they succumb to the shadows that called their names? What fate awaited them as the shadows closed in? The darkness loomed, closing in with a suffocating weight. Shadows danced and twisted like a living nightmare, hungry for what little light remained in Sarah's soul. She clutched her children tight, Jake's tiny fingers slipping through her grasp, and a surge of fear gripped her heart like a vice. "Stay with me," she gasped, pulling him closer. The walls of the decaying cabin pulsated, shadows writhing in the corners, whispering desires that chilled her blood. "Join us, you belong to us." "No," Sarah screamed, a primal instinct igniting a fire within her. "You will not take my kids." The echoes of the shadowy figures grew louder, the sorrowful cries wrapping around her, becoming a cacophony of desperation. "Join us! Help us!" "No, no," she muttered, her mind racing for a strategy. She remembered the altar, the remnants of despair. That's it. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a past that anchored them here, one that couldn't claim her family. "We have to turn this around," she whispered. "We've got their weakness, their pain." As if sensing her resolve, the shadowy figures recoiled momentarily, the air thick with tension. In that fleeting silence, she felt empowered. "Listen to me," she bellowed, fighting the urge to quail at the grotesque shapes closing in. "You were once alive. You experienced love, joy, everything we have." Her voice rang out as a beacon against the encroaching tide of despair. They were lost souls who hadn't truly moved on, still bound in chains forged by their anguish. "Your pain doesn't have to hold you captive. You can be free." The shadows hesitated, their grotesque faces faltering. Hope flickered in Sarah's chest, urging her on. "You don't have to keep reaching for the darkness. Find the light again. Remember what it was like to laugh." A few figures shifted, their forms becoming less menacing. The whispers softened, mingling with something fragile, a glimmer of recognition. "Please, don't take my children," she cried. "You've turned into what you feared the most. You're not just shadows anymore. You can choose." As she spoke, a warmth radiated from her heart, spreading through her arms toward Jake and Emily, filling them, lifting them. "Mom?" Jake whispered, starting to believe. "Can we really help them?" "Yes, we can." Emily threw in, pitching her voice high despite fear cracking it. "We can help you." The shadows shivered collectively, shifting inward as if wrestling with a memory buried beneath layers of anguish. "Join us, it's what we want," their voices entwined, hovering between fear and longing. "Join hands," Sarah commanded, her voice rising. She yanked Jake closer, linking him with Emily. "We one T surrender to darkness. We are family. Together we fight." A light burst forth, illuminating their small circle. The shadows shrank back, contorting in agony as the children's voices threaded through the air, a sweet harmony of love and unwavering belief. "Let us help you," Sarah shouted, locking eyes with the twisted forms. "Look beyond the darkness. Remember the joy. Remember love." In that moment, one shadow flickered, eyes softening, a face emerging, one etched with pain yet longing for release. The familiar features bore the weight of loss, shimmering with a previous life. "Help us, yes," Sarah exclaimed, her heart pounding. "We can move on. We can set you free." The cabin trembled as the figures swirled, drawn toward the light enfolding her family. The shadows erupted around them, still clawing at sanity, yet caught in the tug of conflicting desires. The children squeezed her hands, heartbeats synchronizing in rhythm with the light pulsing from their unity. "Push through," Sarah commanded. "Let love mend what was broken." With each fervent call, the light expanded, hope crashing against the shadows like waves against a cliff. The pressure of anguish lifted, cracking the hold the darkness had over them. Groans turned into whispers of thanks, and long-forgotten faces bloomed from the void, reaching toward the glow with empty hands. Slowly, the sinister laughter transformed, becoming something beautiful, a song of release. Sarah held her breath as the shadows began to dissolve, intertwining with the rippling light, each struggling soul lifting free from its war-torn grasp. And then, the last of the shadows burrowed backwards, disappearing into a brilliant flash of light, leaving only joy behind, a warm glow that suffused the air, rich with love and laughter. "We did it," Jake shouted, eyes wide with wonder as their surroundings shimmered into focus. They stood once more in the vibrant forest, the sun shining brightly overhead. The shadows of despair were gone, just echoes of what had been as whispered tales in the breeze. "More than anything," Sarah sighed. "We fought," Emily echoed, her cheeks splotched with the remnants of tears but marked with hope. Together they stepped back, the cabin fading behind them as the forest sent them on their way, alive with future possibilities and the songs of the free. "Let us go home," Sarah said, lifting her children into her arms as they walked onward, their hearts united against whatever came next. As sunlight filtered through the trees, illuminating their path, Sarah knew their fear had become strength. A chapter closed, a lifetime awaited. But for you, dear listener, this adventure is far from over. You need to subscribe now. Don't let the darkness creep into your notifications. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and make sure these stories are always lit up for you. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories. Your voice matters. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Your support keeps this channel alive, and only true fans understand the importance of backing the journey ahead.